talking to everybody.
Yeah.
So we can pretend,
Right.
but then there's the reality.
Perception is reality.
Clock needs to be fixed.
Well, it depends on what clock you go by. You can go by Apple time or
Is there
Cave
any
Creek
other time?
I've done Apple time.
That's slow time.
Is that like 5 o'clock somewhere?
That's true.
Beast.
Yeah, it works on its own time. So. Oh, okay. Y'all ready? You ready?
I'm gonna be.
Okay. I'd like to call to order this work study of the Cave Creek Unified School District. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, and it is 3 o'clock. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call. Well, all members of the board are present, and Mr. Fortney is en route. So he is not, we're not all present yet. Mr. Fortney is en route.
He's coming.
Oh, he's here.
He stepped in.
Yes, he stepped in. Now all members of the board are present. All members of the cabinet are here. Dr. Hendrickson, Dr. Plotnick, Dr. Jensen, and Mr. Dolezal. This is our work study. This will be a very free-flowing conversation. We're going to start with Dr. Plotnick doing his presentation. And we don't really have a formal way to, we're formally informal. So take it away.
President Busby, I'd just like to bring everybody's attention to please, there's microphones there, so you may need to grab a microphone in speaking so it does get picked up. And then our discussion items are the potential school closures and boundary changes and potential grade reconfiguration for today. So with that.
Okay. Good afternoon, President Busby and board members. What we're going to start off today with is just a little background of what our financial position is as a district. We're going to look at where we currently stand, what the future looks like, and kind of discuss some things that historically have happened that have gotten us in the position that we are in. So the first thing I want to bring your attention to is district spending. District spending, if you look here, fiscal years, and you can see at the top, fiscal year 21, 22, 23, 24 for M&O and capital. You can see consistently that we have been about $32 million over those 4 years of spending. And you can see our capital expenditures have increased over those 4 years. Now, when looking at both of those items, what we have to also take in consideration is that our enrollment has been declining. So we have been spending, and we have been spending at the same level, yet our enrollment has been declining. So as you look at those totals, as we look at these numbers, we'll also see the Auditor General's report of our enrollment being in the high-risk category. So we can correlate those two together. The bottom chart shows our carry forward, and what carry forward is we calculate what our capacity is to spend as a district. So based upon the number of students we have, student needs, we calculate what tax dollars we do collect, and that goes towards our M&O. Capital is assigned by our previous year's enrollment, so it's also called DAA. And so DAA is calculated by simply taking, like, next year's capital, or DAA will be this year's enrollment. So that's how we would calculate that. The state gives us a specific number per grade level, and that's what we get.
Thank you.
Okay, so you can see the carry forward for M&O from 21 increased over the past 2 years. But I want to caution you, that isn't because of enrollment increasing, and it is not necessarily because our expenses began to decrease all of a sudden. If you look at the capital line in FY21, and if we actually go back 1 year prior, it's $2.2 million. Our carry forward is decreased by over $800,000 over that 4-year span. So what we're going to see in the next couple of slides is why that happened. So if we look at 2022, we're going to see up there that our revenue control limit, what we're allowed to, based upon our students' enrollment and based upon our transportation, $30.8 million roughly is what we should have been spending to stay within our budget. But in 2022, what we did is we moved $2.1 million over from capital. And so even though we received $2.3 million in capital, we only had $232,000 in capital. Now, if we go back to a couple of slides previous, we can see our capital expenditures, $428,000. So we are overspending in capital, and that's why you're seeing our capital decrease year to year. So we're moving money over from our capital over to our maintenance operations to try to get to that $32 million number. Now, if we look at 2023, we are going to see a very similar story. Okay, and again, funding, this time we received $2.5 million in capital, and of course, this is going to vary year to year based upon the legislature. They decide what number they fund both students at on the M&O side as well as capital side. But you can see another $2 million that got moved over, and so there we have another year where this is happening. We go to 2024. We can once again see $2 million, leaving only $618,000 in our capital account. So as we see again, our capital expenditures were greater than that $618,000. So all that carry forward is decreasing. And again, we're moving money over to our M&O. And we have, if you look here, $30.6 million is what the state would give us. We are spending $32 million again. So again, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, is what we've been doing. And 2025, when that budget was adopted, $2 million moved over yet again. The one thing I really want you to pay attention to, especially with the decline in enrollment, is you see $30.6 million. All of a sudden, when we look at our loss, we're losing about 6% of our students annually if we take weighted ADM. So that 6% all of a sudden jumped up to nearly 9%, a little over 9%. So that's why you do see, even though the amount the state funded increased, we are still seeing a decrease in that amount for our revenue control limit, all the way down to $28.7 million. So if we look at the current report, this is what we look at for the state, and I'll have a bigger picture for you. But that kind of shows us what our spending capacity is. It gives us what the state says based upon our student enrollment during that current month we can spend as a district. And again, it'll get bigger, and I'll break it down a little bit. But some key points from those previous slides. Our spending has been consistent in respect to M&O, $32 million. Our enrollment has been decreasing. All right, that is not a good combination. We've been moving $2 million plus over from capital or DAA to M&O each year. And if you think about it over the past 5 years, moving that's $10 million we moved over in those 5 years. Okay, so it's not been a small amount of money for our district. That's about a third of our budget. We also, again, capital carry forward has been decreasing. And our revenue control limit, like I just pointed out in the last slide, dropped down to about $28.7 million. So we are using our capital to spend beyond our revenue control limits, and we have been doing this consistently. Now, I had a conversation with the Auditor General actually at 10 a.m. this morning. I had a call with them, and I wanted to discuss some of our risk areas. We are now in the category of high risk in 3 different areas. If we look back, we were for change in student count, as you can see from 2021. When I talk about weighted student count, this is why I point to that weighted student count rather than enrollment. If you look at the Auditor General, 5,677 we were at in 2021. We're all the way down to 4,468. So that puts us in the high-risk category, according to the Auditor General. The other piece that puts us in high risk is our capital money redirected to the operations. Again, $2 million, $10 million over 5 years. And if we go back one more year, it was $1.7 million. So essentially $12 million over 6 years. And then our financial position, our change in general fund, easiest way to describe that is we take fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24 in our general funds, and what they do is see how much they have dropped. And they have dropped to the point where our financial position is at high risk. All right, and in talking to the Auditor General today, the one thing that they wanted me to, and I told them that we would be having a meeting today, they wanted me to reiterate is just how dangerous in capital we are. The Auditor Generals in that conversation wanted me to reinforce to the board that continuing to move capital over to M&O at the rate we are, with our carry forward declining like it is a very, very dangerous financial position. And as you can see, again, last year we weren't, but now we are in that financial position for our general fund being in high risk as well. Okay, so I'm going to look at our financial position moving forward from 2 items. Again, DAA or capital and M&O, and we're going to talk about the capital position first. Again, if we continue our current trends, our capital carry forward will decrease, and we'll see some projections of what it will decrease later. But this has to be the capital, and moving $2 million over to capital every year has to be at the forefront of our thoughts. If we look at where we're at, we had capital carry forward of $1.28 million. Because we moved $2 million over this year, we only received $470,000 in capital. The other $2 million went to M&O. Interest, we do get interest on our capital, so there's our interest added in. So our total ability to spend capital is $1.7 million this year. That is it. That is all we have. There is no reserve past that. We are at $1.7 million. In our current spending last year was $843,000. As of last report, we just crossed over $840,000 already this year. So that spending has hopefully, again, with some of the items I've been talking to Mr. Dolezal with, of we need to begin saving money, we need to pull back spending. Hopefully, we stay somewhere around that $840,000, but we still have more school year to go. If our spending does stay at $843,000, our carry forward for next year will be under $1 million. And if you look at that, that is right about 1 year of spending. So I projected out the carry forward, moving forward 1 more year, as you can see, and you can see yet again another decline. But what you're seeing is our spending is still increasing, so you're seeing a bigger drop every year. So projecting forward to the FY26. So again, it's based on student count, so I have a pretty good idea it's going to be about $2.2 million next year if they fund it the same way. There's the caveat. We moved $2 million over again. That only gives us $224,000 next year from the state for our capital. Our carryover, like I said, is $931,000, a little above that. So $1.1 million in carry forward is what we have. So if we look projecting beyond 26, we have that, like I showed you. Does this have a laser pointer? Yeah. if you see, there's our 1.1. If our spending stays consistent again, but it's been increasing, remember, but we're trying to curb that, 843,000. Our carry forward into FY27 is only 312,000. If we continue this pattern, again, based upon student enrollment drops, you can say 27 may be around $2 million. We move $2 million over again, we're at $98,000. Now, if we put that to our carry forward, 312,000, all we have left is $410,000. In 27, if we spend another $840,000, all of a sudden, we are negative by FY28 in our capital. That is the point we are at. So the fear at this is if you are negative in your capital, it either comes out of the next year's capital budget or you take it from M&O. Okay, so let's talk about M&O and how do we right the ship regarding the M&O side of the house. Again, the $2 million is key. If we're spending within our budget, within our limits, that 28.7, that's what we're allotted. But what we've been doing is moving that $2 million over to cover additional costs. So, as you can see, there's two things we can do here. Number one, spend and spend within our capacity, or increase efficiency. So those are two items that we have to look at. Now, where we're at right now with that 2.7 as well is, if you look at current enrollment and I move forward, our 100-day count and our official numbers should be out next month, but it should be slightly under that the 28.7 million. It's going to most likely be a little bit closer to 28.3. That 28.7 was the budget that was adopted this summer with Ms. Rodriguez. So what does that mean? This is the close-up view of that big sheet that I showed you. And if we look up, right in December, the state has us at $28.495 million in our revenue control limit. So based upon our enrollment in December, the state says you are going to have $28.495 million to spend. Then our $2 million from capital. And then there's a couple other items that get adjustments to what we are allowed to spend that you see up there. $3.7 million is our carry forward. And then Prop 123, there was a little additional funding. And that gives us a total of $34.5 million. That is all we have. So again, if you just think just from this point on, 32 million we spend a year and we only have 34.5 million, that's not a whole lot left over. And again, our capital is decreasing on top of that. So where are we at right now? As of yesterday, pulling the reports, our year to date plus what we call our encumbrances, essentially the money that's already earmarked to be spent, such as salaries, we are at $30.8 million being spent this year already. If you look at, again, our M&O from that last page, which was $34.5 million, if we take out that $30.8 million, our carry forward for next year is right about the same, $3.7 million. Now, again, I'm going to warn you, we are in January. Expenses are going to keep coming. So chances of us staying at 30.779, slim to none. This morning I pulled the report again. We're above $3.8 million in M&O expenditures. So let's just say we do end with that 3.7. I'm going to go out to 28 again for you. Next year, if we have the same amount of loss as we have and funding remains the same from the state, instead of 28 million, we can count on about $26.7 million. Then, if we move $2 million over again, that gives us that 28.7, our carry forward, And now we have just $32.5 million. And remember, it was just at 34 this year. That means if we spend $30.8 million again next year, our carry forward for 27 is $1.7 million. Now, if we go with the same amount of funding in FY27, the same amount, meaning we don't lose one student, we keep enrollment the same, which we know that hasn't happened. We bring $2 million over again. We know that's going to result in our capital being negative after this year. We take the $1.7 million in carry forward. That gives us a total capacity of $30.5 million. If we spend $30.8 million and stay consistent with that, that means we are negative carry forward for FY28. Remember, now that's negative in capital, negative in M&O. So there's no robbing Peter to pay Paul anyway. Our district will be negative and we will be upside down. And that's just kind of a graph going year by year on that timeline with it. Now, how do we stay afloat and how have we stayed afloat is a good question. That's where we have to look at additional spending. We've been looking at capital and M&O, and that's where people are like, we make money, we lose money. We don't make money, we don't lose money. We're in the school business. We are not a business, okay? So we have to look at it in a slightly different way. Number one, what we do is we supplement the money that the state allows us to spend, and there's a couple of different ways we do that. The first way is with grants, such as IDEA, our Title I, II, III, our safety grants for our SRO officers come out of that. Classroom site funds, which are used primarily for teachers and additional teacher pay. Auxiliary funds, that's our rental. Now, there's two sides of the house you have to remember. There's a side of the house that you saw up there with the M&O and capital. That's state controlled. And then there's a cash side of the house where it's like, for example, our football field rental. That doesn't impact our ADM. It doesn't impact our capital. That's kind of extra cash that we can spend on different things because we're doing outside services. So we kind of have to keep that in mind. Okay, so when I'm talking about capital and I'm talking about ADM, I'm talking about formula-funded, budget-controlled items. When I'm talking about auxiliary funds like Civic Center, I'm talking about cash side. When you look at things like grants, those are a whole separate category. Those are federal funds, okay? Gifts and donations, again, that's another way. Kiwanis is a great partner for us, wonderful partner, who we get a lot of money from in order to help supplement where we can in our schools. Tax credits and ECS is very much like the auxiliary fund. When we look at ECS, it's almost like rental. It's on that cash control side as well. One thing we have to keep in mind is these will fluctuate. Our title money got cut in half. IDEA went from 1.7 down to $1.1 million for special ed this year. ESSER funds, those were those COVID funds. Those are gone now. Results-based funding, those are gone now. Now, the tricky thing with those is like results-based funding from the state. If we historically as a district funded a position out of those, and that money's not there anymore, like it's not, that means we have to move it somewhere. And where do we move that? To M&O. So we have put Band-Aids. When we talk about Band-Aids, those are some of the Band-Aids. ESSER. ESSER money, using ESSER money in order to fund positions. It's gone. So how are we going to fund the positions? Either we get rid of them or we put them in our M&O. And that is what's getting us in trouble. Okay, so if you look at all funds per school, so now we're looking at not only capital, not only M&O, here are all the funds we spend in each one of our schools. Our capital and M&O cannot support our spending in our schools. And what we're going to look at is this next slide. If we look at this next slide, you can see here's our weighted ADM amounts that you've been seeing. But if you look at all of our spending from all those other categories, you can see Black Mountain has spent $3.9 million in FY24. 3.1 coming in. We are supplementing in every single one of our elementary schools. So this whole idea that we're making money in any of our elementary schools, or this is more profitable, there's different funding sources we have to look at. And that's the part that is different from business finance to school finance, is the different buckets you always hear. And that's because certain things come from federal, and certain federal monies follow certain students. Certain monies are only for teachers, and there's certain things that those monies can be spent on. And
I just wanted to quickly point out, too, with donations, that our PTOs have been tremendous resources. So if they are funding positions, that will, on a campus, that's included in that total dollar as well.
Okay. So this isn't, and if we look at this I'm hoping is not new or a surprise to any of our board members, because this has been plugging down the line for the past couple of years. The other thing, and again, if we look at history, and I think Patty can speak to history, is we've been talking about school closures for a while. The difference is, at this point, is those projections moving out forward, where we're going to hit that negative mark, where we are going to have difficulty paying our bills. So that becomes how do we stop that bleeding? How do we correct it? Again, how do we cut expenses, but also how do we move that capital back, or I'm sorry, move the capital and keep it in capital rather than moving it to M&O.
Yeah, just a little bit about the history. I mean, just a quick little dive into documents recently. I mean, I looked through board docs, but then I also looked through other things. And since 2011, we've been talking about school closures with the failed override in 2011. I've got multiple times with the last, Dr. Burdick was talking about school closures before she left. I know Dr. Monroe, when we didn't pass the bond, they talked about school closures. When we didn't pass the override, school closures. We had our very supportive, the PAC came up and said, this is really sad because now we know we're going to need to go down the road of school closures. And so I know there's been a lot of narrative about this is a rushed decision, and I think we need to separate that from a formal focus group to it's been laid in the groundwork for many, many, many years. And it's something that's happening, unfortunately, all across Arizona, and I think it makes us all sad.
Edgar, will you throw my PowerPoint up? So I'm going to go over some certified staffing projections and a little bit of classified. So when we look at school closures and we talk about what Ryan was mentioning, efficiencies, and we look at consolidation of schools, how do we cut some costs and maximize some efficiencies? And so with the latest recommendation that we have with our two schools closing and how they're going to be rezoned, I want to kind of paint a picture of what that would look like if all those students were to go to those schools. Obviously, those would change, and so where our allocations of staffings would change. And so this is the current enrollment at Black Mountain and Lone Mountain, and then the projected enrollment at each site. So in the green on the left, you see the numbers for just kindergarten through fourth grade. Obviously, part of our proposal is to move sixth grade up. And so if we look at Black Mountain and Lone Mountain current ones, and then we project up for next year for a K-5, where we get that kindergarten number from is we basically, historically what we look at is how many kindergartners do we have this year? We match that for next year. So we projected 200 kindergartners this year, and I think we were at 220. So we were actually got more kindergartners than we anticipated. So then when we look in the blue section there, you see all of the Lone Mountain and Black Mountain students together, K-5, the number of students at that site, so that puts them 600 there, then an additional 16 students in our self-contained programs. One of the narratives I hear or questions I get over and over again is this will cause class sizes to go up. Class sizes will go up. The way we staff is based off enrollment. So if I have 100 students, if I allocate 4 teachers for that kindergarten grade level, that puts our class average there at 25. When I look at the board adopted policy, the target for kindergarten per board policy is 25. So we're right there where we need to be. And again, it's a perfect size model for that. And then you go down the line. So Black Mountain, based off this, would have an FTE allocation of 4 sections at each grade level. And then there you see some of the averages there. The highest being 4th grade would be sitting at 32. The target for 4th grade per policy is 30, additional aid time at 33 students, and then an additional teacher at 35. So all of our numbers would continue to fall within board policy, and so we would not be seeing an increase in numbers. And these are similar numbers that we see at other schools currently. And again, very clean numbers as far as we don't have a classroom of 15 to 20 students here, and then we have a classroom of 28, 29, 30 at another site. So this makes it a good match there. And then we have our PATH teachers. Currently we have a projected roll-up of 5 PATH students. Based on those programs and requirements of those programs through special education, that they have a separate allocation for that, and that's based on the number or the grade span of kids. And so even though it's a low number of kids, based on the grade span, you're going to have a teacher for each level of grade band.
Age level.
Age level. Thank you. Age level. And then you see our resource allocation at 40. If we are matching board policy, that would be an allocation of 1.5 resource teachers for that site. So when we look at where some of the savings are, so currently Black Mountain has 15 FTE full-time equivalent teachers. That's their K-5 teachers. I'm not talking about specials, SPED, any of that. They would require 20 for next year, so they would see an increase of 9 teachers that would need to be transferred to that site. Lone Mountain currently has 12 teachers. So if I take 12 teachers and I need to move 9 over to Black Mountain, let's say, if we did as clean as that, there would be a difference of 3 FTE. So that's 3 positions that we would look at eliminating from that. And again, when we do this transfer process, teachers are going to have input when they go through the transfer process. They're going to be able to have a chance to request a school they would like, a grade level or grade band that they would like. And again, I continue to feel confident that we will not need to reduce staff and force any reduction in force based on our natural attrition that we see. As we look at horseshoe trails, again, same spreadsheet here. You see our horseshoe trails numbers and DSA numbers currently. As we combine those two together, that puts horseshoe trails at an allocation of 3 at each grade level K-5. Again, all of our numbers within board policy there, so an overall average of 27.6. Total enrollment of 487, needing 18 teachers for that. And then current, it would be two resource teachers to service 46 kids, again, within board policy there. So as we look at current FTE at Horseshoe Trails, are sitting at 14 teachers. They would need 18 teachers based off this, so they need an additional 4. Desert Sun currently has 6 K-5 teachers, and so that difference between the 6 and 4, there would be a reduction of 2 positions that we would capture there. And then as we look overall, so with the other campus that I didn't have a spreadsheet there for is Desert Willow. Desert Willow, where we look at some of those efficiencies and where we can look at some combo classes or some triads with the Spanish and the English side of things. Overall, we would be looking at a reduction of 9 teachers through this consolidation. As we look at specials, we would be looking at a reduction of 7 teachers. So that equates to 3 teachers from the 2 sites that are closed. The French teacher, that's considered a specials, if you will, kind of thing. So that gets us to an FTE difference of 7 of what we would need for next year. Those asterisks I have there, a couple things just want to point out. Let me get to my notes. So currently not all of our FTEs right now are filled, or they're not filled with certified positions. So we do have some vacancy savings going on right now. One of our sites, we have some individuals who are emergency certified in those positions, or we have like a long-term sub in those positions. So even though that's a higher number of specials that we would need to reduce, there's not as many teachers in those positions that are currently holding proper certification. So when we look at changes for our ESS, again, if we staff our ESS at the board adopted policy, we've been overstaffing them, kind of trying to provide some additional supports. But if we look at meeting our board policy, currently in K-5 there's 9 FTEs that are allocated across our 5 schools. based on the projection, there would only need to be four resource teachers, so that it's a difference of 5. Our PALS program is shrinking, and so we would need 2 teachers, so there's a savings of 1 there. And then we'd also look at reducing our DPS. We could look at reducing 1 position there. Oh, yeah. And the other thing as we look at this, and I think I have another slide there too, but we have quite a few SPED teachers that are contract teachers, both in resource and our self-contained programs. And so when we look at the reduction here in 5 FTEs and absorbing our teachers that are our teachers, we definitely will find that there's going to be space for our teachers here by getting rid of our contract teachers, which cost us almost double for each teacher. It's around double. And then additional reductions as we look at elementary, administrative reduction, para reduction across K-12, looking at that, office staff, and then other reductions such as custodial, health assistants, ECS, child nutrition, and IT techs. Those are the fixed overhead costs that are each sites. And then finally, our Sonoran Trails projection. There's our 5, 6, 7 grade levels. As we roll them up, we would be looking at a total enrollment at Sonoran Trails at 941, and then you see, sorry about that. Based on number of sections, number of teachers that we need at each section, and then the total FTEs that we would have for that. When we look at a number like 7.2, we need basically that's 7 teachers and 1 that would teach a 6/5. You could meet that way. Or sometimes you'll have a teacher that's teaching a core class and a specials class, and so typically we don't hire someone that's just comes in for 1 period a day. We fill their plate full with other sections there. And then as we look at overall changes at Sonoran Trails between the current 10 FTEs of 6th grade teachers and then 7th, 8th, and 8th grade teachers, and then what we would actually need, this is just for our core classrooms, we would need about 23.2, so we'd be seeing a reduction of about 2.6 FTE at the middle school, so that's roughly another 2 teachers. We probably would round it down to 2. There would be some additional allocation, so there is some additional costs there. Patty is still working with Mr. Boggs over at Sonoran Trails and her committee that she has going, looking at what is the specials or the electives that they'll be taking, possibly needing to look at another office staff member. Currently they have 2 front office staff, or 3. The receptionist and then 2 admin assistants, probably needing an attendance clerk, so that would be another position there. And then we would move a resource teacher over there. They would qualify for 4 resource teachers. They currently have 3 resource teachers. Classified shifts. Currently we have several temp positions, contractor positions in SPED across the district. That's going to be able to hopefully eliminate those and move our regular teachers in there. Open vacant positions throughout the district. Again, there's lots of unfilled positions, and this is the most fluctuating group of individuals, and so we have openings. We're kind of putting a freeze on any openings right now in order to make sure we can absorb classified staff to other sites. We know we'll probably need additional child nutrition workers at Sonoran Trails and Black Mountain, just based on their enrollment there. And then ECS, as we look at, do we have increased kids at our ECS before and after school programs, adding additional staff members there as well. So when I look at the overall projected savings based on those numbers, so as I look at classroom teachers, special teacher reduction, ESS reduction, administrative reduction, classified office, and then classified classroom, this is their average based on salary and benefits. So when we take our average salary, we add 21%, which covers ASRS and our benefits cost. And so that's where we're getting that $70,000 for on average a teacher. That's the entire compensation package that costs the district there. So when we add all these numbers up, we'd be looking at about a savings of about $2.6 million with this efficiency, with consolidating our schools here. Again, still servicing kids at the same level that we are currently servicing them, still providing the specials, the counseling supports, all those things. It's simply moving kids from one site to another with a savings of 2.6. Again, there's going to be some additional costs, but there's still going to be quite a big savings there.
Well, and just remember, that's different than what had gone because we used traditional numbers that other school districts had done just from M&O when we came up with the original, it'd be 1.2. So now that we've got some better numbers and all of that, that's where you see, and again, PV has talked to us about they've realized more savings than they projected. So this is, again, moving up into a potential savings higher than what we first anticipated in terms of using that conservative number of the different percentages. Dr. Pletnick took off all the budgets.
Is that baked into your projection?
No, not that. No projections.
Okay.
And that's just salaries, right?
That's just salaries and
benefits.
salaries and benefits, and that doesn't include some of the extra stipends that we provide out there. I think last year we spent about $750,000 in stipends. That's coaching stipends, club stipends, loyalty stipends, things like that. So there's some unrealized savings there as well. Now, if I break it down just by school, if I look at DSA alone, based on those students moving over, the staff that we would need to move over to Horseshoe Trails based on our current recommendation, that school alone, you're looking at $853,000 in savings. Again, the breakdown of the positions that would be reduced there. Lone Mountain, as I look at that, they have a savings of about $1.1 million with that site, again, with moving our staff over. Now, just so you know why my numbers are off, I have 1.1 here, 853,000 here. That's not going to add up to 2.6. Remember that these numbers here do not include reduction at Desert Willow, just based on kind of enrollment, reduction at the high school or at the middle school with the 2 positions that are reduced there. This would be the total K6 savings, again, based on the recommendation that we have. K8 savings, thank you. And that's the end of my slide there.
I think the important thing to remember here is that those are savings without adjusting the way we're doing life. So teachers won't get more students in their classrooms. Kids will still receive 3 specials. Teachers will still receive 5 preps per week. If we want to start talking about adjusting those numbers, then that's where then we get into, we have to change the way we do school right now. And that's where we would start talking about cutting specials, cutting electives, offering 7-12, K-12, frankly. That's where we would then start talking about, let's price each thing out and make some a la carte package. But when it's just like when you shop wholesale, you realize more savings than when you just do all of these little nickel and dimes here.
And Ed, here, can you put up my spreadsheet for me, please? Okay, so now let's get into numbers and lots of numbers. Scenarios and running scenarios and projections, and we have passed the 100-day, so we kind of have an idea of where our enrollment stands. Again, these are just projections. If we look over the past 4 years, we've been seeing, again, overall 6%, 6%, 9% drop. And so when I'm looking at this, I first wanted to project moving forward to next year. If we have the same loss of students as we did this year, so in dealing with this, what I did is track cohorts, meaning 1st to 2nd grade, 2nd to 3rd grade, 3rd to 4th, over the years, and saw what percentage of students we lost. What we're looking at the elementary level is just over 2% at our elementary level is what we lose. Middle school, we're just over 5%. When we go 8th to 9th grade, that is where we lose a lot of students. Over 10% of our students are lost between 8th and 9th grade. At that point, what we look at is it begins to decrease, like we lose about 3% 9th to 10th grade, then it goes down to about 2%, 1%, following accordingly. Then when I'm looking at the enrollment and I'm projecting the enrollment, I use the state formulas in order to do our weighted counts. So with that, what I did for projections moving forward is I took a 2% reduction at the elementary level at all grades. I took a 5% at the middle school levels, and then high school accordingly. On top of that, when I look at the special education of the B weightings, What we saw is overall on the B side of it, about 14% loss between the last 2 years. But that also does take in consideration our K-3 reading weighting. So when you take that out, it's more towards that 10% actually. But what I did in the projections is I rolled each grade up. And what we did is we rolled them up using that loss percentage. Then in our B weighting, what we did is I actually took 14% off of that B weighting. Even though it does track down closer to 10, all my numbers I like to be a little bit more conservative on. And last year, we were pretty close with our projection on ADM. So using that, if you look at a full rollover, meaning we do not lose one student, we just roll everybody up one grade, not losing one student, we're still going to lose enrollment because our graduating seniors aren't as big as our kindergartners coming in. So if all of that in the perfect world happened, our revenue control limit, remember, our revenue control limit on the December budget was $28,495,000 when we saw that PowerPoint a little bit ago. It would decrease by about $350,000, or our revenue control limit would be about $28.1 million in a perfect world. If we match the loss that we had this year, we are looking at, and you saw this number earlier in my projection, the $26.9 million, we would lose about $1.5 million. Just, again, if we realize the same amount of loss, we're looking at $1.5 million. So we're looking at not that $28.5 million that we have this year. We're looking at $26.9 million. So remember, we dropped from 30.6 million down to 28.5 now. Now we're looking at 28.5 down to 26.9.
And this is a foreseeable trend as we graduate more seniors than we bring in kindergartners, and I think we're all familiar with the lower number of students, the declining birth rate, the affordability of homes. I mean, that is foreseeable into the future in terms of losing students from 12th grade and kindergarten, those numbers not aligning.
Yeah, and in all reality, I would love to talk about magic of stopping the bleeding, but we see the state of Arizona. I mean, Mesa's meeting today to cut 400 positions. Chandler's cutting 178 positions. We can talk about attracting students, which, yes, we still need to market and we still need to attract students, but we also have to be real and we have to understand. We have seen this loss. You saw the Auditor General report from going over 5,000 to 4,000 students. To be out there programming, if we look at Mandarin, if we look at French immersion, if we look at IB and those numbers enrolled in those specialty programs, they're all shrinking. Or they have shrunk, they have gone. So when we talk about specialty programs, and which requires money, by the way, and that's the other piece. If we're shrinking from 28.5 down to 26.9 million, where are we going to find the money to introduce new programming? That would be a big difficulty on this. But going back to that, that's, again, 1.5 million just with natural attrition. Now, how we've run these scenarios is, again, moving sixth grade, and again, we took a lump sum of 12.5% on December, but knowing where we are with the loss of enrollment at the 100-day, and knowing if sixth grade moves up, we'll take 5% off of sixth grade. Kinder, we're going to keep steady at 200, like it has been, but we're going to take, like with, for example, under DSA, 15%, 15 off of first grade, 15 off of second grade, 15 off of third grade, 15 off of fourth, 15% off of fifth grade. What we're looking at is our amount is going to be reduced, not by the $1.5 million, but it would be down $1.72 million. So we're looking at, because we lose 15% if we close DSA, on top of the 1.5, it's going to be an additional almost $170,000. But what we also have to realize is, again, if we go with the base savings, the very conservative savings, we're going to have expenditure savings on that side. But if we lose 15% at DSA, instead of again, this year it was $28.5 million in revenue control limit. We're down to $26.7 million. So I ran this scenario for Desert Sun at 15%, then Desert Sun where I took an extra 15% off of their SPED funding. So SPED funding is going to vary by school based upon what students are at that school. Remember, I've already taken 14% off of that. This is taking just that particular school and taking another 15% off. Running that scenario. DSA, I dropped, the next scenario is at 12.5%. And then below it is the 12.5% plus another 12.5% on the SPED funding. So as you can see, I did that with Desert Sun, I did that with Lone Mountain, and then we also did the same thing with Desert Sun and Lone Mountain. And Edgar, can you scroll down? And on the bottom, I also ran the worst, pretty bad scenarios in respect to the very bottom is, the bottom two lines are DSA losing 12.5%, Lone Mountain losing 25%, Sonoran Trails losing another 10% with the sixth graders, and then the very bottom number is taking another 12.5% off the spend on top of that. So as you can see, moving down to the worst case scenario, it would be 2.2 million lower than what we're expecting already, or 2.2 million compared to the 1.5 we're expecting already in loss. So you can see in that case scenario where that loss would come from. So what we can do is we can plug and play with these numbers in respect to when I showed you we went off the cliff by fiscal year 28 and went into the negative. That's what these numbers are good for using. It can show us if we take our expenditures from $30.8 million and if we close, again, 2 schools, we can take $1.2 million off of that and project that we're going to spend $29.6 million. And then we can project kind of where our ADM funding would be at for each of those schools. And we can run those various scenarios.
Can you scroll up to the top? So again, doing nothing, 1.5 in that first, what we need to come up with in terms of the 1.5. As bad as all these other scenarios are, due to savings, you ultimately even scroll down, Edgar, to the very last ones that were at 900,000 or 982,000. So all of that ultimately is more savings and in a better position for the district than doing nothing.
So either 1.5 million cuts doing nothing, or again, with the worst case scenario that I ran, 982,000 we're looking at needing for savings somewhere down the line. And again, if we look at that 1.2, I really think we saw by the numbers that Dr. Hendrickson ran that 1.2 is very conservative on that. So I think we're on that savings. Again, we're being very conservative. Another question that would come up is, well, if we have to keep these buildings open, won't that come off of that 1.2 savings? The answer is no. No, I remember in those projections, I'm using the projections I used on the 3rd, not Dr. Hendrickson's. Remember, I had 70% of our 2,600, which is our maintenance and operations. So that leaves 30% of the budget that we spent in FY24. I am still putting in that M&O, in our expenditures we're keeping to keep those buildings going. So that's the big question, the phase two question. I understand phase 2 and I understand the need for phase 2 and I understand that we absolutely need to have that plan for phase 2. But what we're saying is if we don't do anything, 1.5 million we're cutting. If we decide that the worst case scenario is going to happen and we end up closing 2 schools, less than $1 million is what we're cutting. Okay, so that's the hemorrhaging that needs to begin to stop. Phase 2, when we're looking at phase 2, all right, so this is the funding side. Phase 2 can begin cutting expenditures. Special education is an absolute must to cut expenses. Our IDA fund already is pretty much tapped out in respect to, we have spent $1.1 million in IDA. Our Medicaid funding already is almost $700,000 in spending. We have 30 students that we are outplacing in special education right now. Average cost of that is about $80,000 per student. So that's, if you do the math, that's about $2.4 million that we're spending on tuition. Can we bring some of these students back and not pay the $80,000 in tuition? Yes. Could we take a school and can we turn it into a facility where we can service level C and D? Yes. And can we have savings? That'll impact us in a couple of different ways. Number one, our expenditures. So we're just looking at revenue here, or we're looking at what we get from the state from our tax revenue. But our expenditures at $30.8 million right now, if we can take and drop those expenditures down, okay, that is also going to help us in this teeter-totter. And so that's why looking at costs such as that on the expenditure side and saving on the special ed is important, because if we look at a student who's outplaced with, let's say, ED, emotional disorder, we're getting a weighting of, when we look at funding, 0.29, what it's called, right? Very minimal. So we're bringing $5,000 in for the student. Maybe we get another $1,000, so about $6,000. But we're spending $80,000 in tuition. All right, fiscal responsibility. You know, we can service those kids. We can bring in staffing. And even if it costs us $1.5 million to staff a facility, it's better than $2.4 million going out in tuition. So when we talk about phase two, that's an easy one. That if we have a facility that I'm able to take Ms. Gregory and our special ed department and begin building that program, which we've been in talks, we've been taking steps to do that, that's going to cut that expenditures. Because when you take our IDA, you take our Medicaid reimbursement, you take our M&O, we could be spending $8.5 million just on our special education this year. So we have to find ways to be more responsible with this. Then when we look at our other facility, if we close down another facility, we still have the 30%, yes, that's in our budget to maintain that facility so it does not turn into Desert Arroyo. I will tell you this administration has learned from the past. As I walk through it, and I don't really want to go near Desert Arroyo at times without a hazmat suit, you know, it's there to maintain. If we do move programming such as ECS down there, that is on that cash side, remember. It doesn't impact the ADM funding that you're seeing up here at all. That is on that opposite side, like ECS and facility rentals. So we have to keep that in mind. So yes, we have the money to maintain it. Yes, we have the money to keep going. Would it be prudent to maintain it for a long period of time empty? Absolutely not. And that's where I would have to turn it over to Mr. Dolezal to say that is where we look at other options with the property.
Correct. You've done a great job talking about the different sites and options that we've got there. Again, we get more money for our special ed students, albeit additional. It is never sufficient whatsoever. So looking at dedicating one of those buildings to a level CD programming, and Dr. Pletnick's already gone over the savings there. We do feel very fortunate because we do have a tremendous asset in our district in Mrs. Carrie Gregory. She does have experience in developing these types of programs and would lead the process. Again, that would cut costs. It would potentially create a revenue stream because should we have room, just like now we send students out and we pay other school districts, we could actually accept students from other school districts. I know both PV and DV have programs. I also know that they're pretty full. I know Fountain Hills does not have a program and is currently looking. There's even a potential partnership. We could potentially cut costs if we wanted to work with them along those lines in terms of developing a program between our two districts. But even more importantly, I think we can serve our kids better, which is the most important thing. We could do a better job with our students that we're now sending to other places by keeping them in-house. Again, it would even save on transportation costs and all of those things as well. So, again, next year our goal would be to start small. What could we do? What could we learn? I think Dr. Pleck mentioned Mrs. Gregory and Dr. Jensen have met with AZ Aspire, which is one of the places we send. They're willing to work with our people, our paras, do some training with our staffing and all of that to really get us up and ready. But starting small, bringing back some of those, cutting some of that cost, and then target in August 26, 2026 for a full program rollout.
Which,
Again-
and I would like to say, if we do move it to one of our closed schools, and we do begin that program, even small at one of our closed schools, and again, $80,000 a student times even 4 students is $320,000, which if you take a para and a staff member, it's still saving us money. But then the SFD whole, like our building will not be empty. It will be with our students, so it still would fall under that umbrella. So that is a key point, because I keep hearing the SFD piece come out, and we move a program there, all good.
Right, and ultimately, even to other ideas down the road is once that's developed, could that also become a center right now? When students make bad choices and they earn an out-of-school suspension, it's just that. It's out of school, oftentimes at home. Oftentimes we hear, well, it's more like a vacation or what have you. Having a center like that could be a place where those students actually go. So yes, they are suspended from their school, but they're reassigned to there. So then we're actually keeping them in school and moving their education along instead of just having them at home. Again, I talked about having meetings with AZ Aspire already to continue that partnership and training. And then on the other side, as Dr. Plechnik mentioned, looking at education and community services, having a community center and that type of thing for housing preschool students. Again, just different options from being out in the community. One of the things we could do is follow a model that's started by Mesa, and can we attract and bring in other monies from our students who, in our area, which is one of the highest in the state in terms of taking ESA dollars, many of them may go to private schools, but if they're homeschooled, we can offer through education and community services some elective type offerings or different things. Again, they're not for credit classes, so the staffing doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher, but we can offer things in the community in a market-based economy on terms of what they're selecting for their kids. We can do electives that otherwise homeschool parents really can't provide for their students. In addition, some other things we've talked about is on our chamber. I know that people are coming into town and they want training centers, so could there be short and long-term rentals available for if they're bringing in people for any training events and that type of thing. Temporary spaces for therapists to meet with clients and things like that could be leased out through our ECS center. Again, all of our sites, regardless of where they are, will continue to open up to the community in terms of rentals. Dr. Plechnik had talked about the Civic Fund dollars and those coming in from rentals, so we would continue that practice across all of ours. And then lastly, as he mentioned, if we don't, we look at all these things, we realize savings, we've got them targeted, but we're not saving enough money. Ultimately, down the road, the next and the final phase would be looking at, do we need to sell? What do we need to do with those properties if we cannot make them to where they're costing us money and not making us money? But that would be down the road in the initial plan, and we do believe that repurposing is a viable option for our schools. You've gotten a lot of information in the last hour. I'd like to open up the floor to you guys in terms of questions. Unless Dr. Plechnik, Dr. Hendrickson, Dr. Jensen, anything else from?
The one other thing I just want to kind of reiterate, and Dr. Plechnik did a good job of saying, we have to cut $1.5 million no matter what. We've kind of been through this like every year, it feels like. It just keeps happening every single year. For last year, that involved results-based funded positions. So that was our STEAM teacher at Lone Mountain, our
Reading
somebody who was doing
specialist.
STEM and reading intervention at Horseshoe Trails, several aides and paras, counselors at 2 of our schools. So we've been doing our best to keep it from touching the classroom as much as possible, even though every time we do, it touches somebody. We're kind of at the point, I don't know what else. It will be counselors at the rest of the elementaries. They won't be there. It will be, I don't want to get into reading interventionists. I don't know how we do our jobs without teaching young children who are struggling to read how to read. But it will be so close, you said it a while ago, to the bone, that people will fill it. There will be combo classes at every single site in order to make that 1.5 million work. We might have to reconsider the class size. I've got different scenarios where we're saying if it's a if we don't close anything, it's 33 to a class and 4 to 5 combo classes per site. If we close one of them, it's 30 per class, that's kinder through 6th, and 4 to 5 combos per site. No elementary counselors, no specials. We'd go down to 2 specials per school. Teachers would get 4 preps per week. So it's kind of like when we get into these scenarios, we're starting to get so close to the bone that we're running out of things to cut. And what worries me most is it's not just next year. Okay, so we can cover 1.5 the next year. The next year we'd have to cut another 1.5. I don't know. At a certain point, we're going to be like the one-room schoolhouse. And
Well, and that's it. If we cut light, you can, again, 26, 27, it's a deep, deep cut because we know what's coming in 28. So you can say we have a year, well, do a little bit, then we have a year to do it, and then, but in that year, if we have a increase in enrollment drop, remember, we're still moving 2 million over from capital in these scenarios.
And that needs to go back. And, right, all of these things. So people have asked, what's the reimagined CCUSD? I think we first need to reimagine CCUSD as a district that's living within its means and following its budget. That's where we need to get to first. This recommendation doesn't come light. It doesn't come easy. The idea of having this conversation is not anything we'd like to do, but we've got to get ourselves in a right position. Again, every warning we get is you got to stop moving $2 million over. You've seen now in terms of where are we going, how much carry forward do we have and how is that diminishing over the next couple of years?
And I don't think one move isn't, we've gotten ourselves over years and years and years into this spot. If you look at it, I counted back 6 years with 2 million moving over. So this isn't, and I always equate it to these guys, it's like credit card debt. Like, we're not paying it all off at once. That we have to make moves to be more efficient, to realize those cost savings year after year after year, or else we are going to find ourselves in this same spot. So that's where when we do this, it has to be smart decisions in respect to we have to cut costs moving forward, but we also have to increase those efficiencies moving forward. Because, again, 1.5 plus the 2 million, if we can move part of that 2 million over, we put ourselves in better position capital-wise. So if we only save 600 instead of, say, 1.2, 1.5 this year, that's that difference that we have to make up that next year because it's going to carry forward with us for that next year again. So we're digging ourselves in a deeper hole. So the question is, when do you want to stop digging? And that's where we're at. I wish I had a better, and I never would want to say anything like this, but it's when are we going to stop digging that hole? Because we've been trying to fill it, but it hasn't worked.
Well, and just really quickly, I left off a couple of things. There's other opportunities. We are continuing to meet with outside groups. So ROI Properties and Gus Rosenfels is helping us with all the different deeds and the structures of our land and our buildings. Sustainability Partners is another group. I've got appointments now with 3 out of the 4 city managers that we serve, just in terms of talking and meeting with them at the different towns and cities. And again, we still need to put together another group that really continues to explore and support the usage of district properties that are no longer serving, as schools in particular. And then one thing I just feel like I have to say, I'd like to really point out that we all went into education to serve kids because we want to see them grow, we want to see them develop, we want to see them be their best. And now it is unfortunate that we find ourselves needing to be landlords, raising our own money because the funding we get is not adequate. So again, as part of this conversation, I'm very interested in hearing what the board's thoughts are in terms of those things and what you see as ideas. Again, we have some more numbers we can go over in terms of what other, where we could cut based on, if we only close one school or we don't close any schools and all of that. Because that will ultimately be what is being decided down the road in terms of coming up with a balanced budget moving forward. So with that, we'd like to turn it over to you and questions and have a
Can I
conversation.
add one more comment, Bill?
Sorry.
Sorry. One of the things we talk a lot about in IBN is the good of the whole. As we make decisions, what is the good of the whole? And, kind of Patty mentioned, if we do nothing and have to cut 1.5 million, that will impact every single student and every single teacher. Working conditions is a constant conversation in IBN. 1.5 million, when we are looking at nickel and dime trying to get to that amount, you're looking at cutting lunch aids. You're looking at cutting possibly sub-budgets because we don't have enough teachers we can cut or extra staff on those campuses, cutting counselors. That is going to make working conditions harder for teachers because of the fact that we have to get to that number somehow. Closing 2 schools is hard. It's a challenge for those students, for those families, for those teachers. No one wants to do that. That is a short-term impact once they get settled, once they're in their new place. If we're cutting specials, if we're cutting counselors, that is a long-term impact. That's going to impact every student across the board, every teacher across the board. And so I just want to kind of have you guys
And
keep
further
that in
impact
mind.
potentially enrollment.
And enrollment. And that's the other thing that we look at is all of a sudden if we don't have comprehensive schools with these programming, how does that continue to attract our students? How does that continue to attract our teachers as well?
Okay.
So why aren't we looking at 3 schools?
We only approved 2 to
We were only
discuss.
presented 2. I'm just saying at the end of the day, I feel like we're being boxed in and there's no flexibility in movement. So it's like, make a decision. And if you don't make this decision, here's catastrophic. I'll say it again. So obviously we're being presented some fun numbers. So why didn't we get presented? I mean, the focus group was flawed out of the beginning. No disrespect to the focus group because they were focused on an outcome, a very specific outcome. 3 schools should have been put up. So that we had a fair look at the land because as a board, we were flying blind in this one. We're just going, here's your option, vote, have a nice day. Hopefully we get it right. Very summarized. I get it. But that's kind of where we're at right now. It's pick 1, pick 2, but you really need to pick 2 because if you don't, here's the other options. I mean, at the same point in time, I'm still trying to figure out, let's say you get your hand of 2 schools. You're going to move 5th to Sonoran. You're going to, in August, potentially explore special education. You're going to transition staff, families, and students to multiple different schools. Plus, we haven't really calculated how many really go where you want them to go. And then I'm going, what else am I missing in this whole moving parts that have to have success or we miss? So we can miss on numbers. And in business, because we use business terms in the forums, in business when you have cash burn, when you go to this approach and CFOs come in the room, they paint a really dark picture for you so you really understand the magnitude in which you're facing. However, then there's the business side of it of, do I accept the terms or do I dig out? And I'm not sure we have all the answers just yet. And not seeing Desert Willow in this same landscape and getting a picture of 2, 3 combination or whatever, we're just looking at this particular lens. I don't know if we have all the right information.
Hey, Edgar, can you flip over, please, for me to the next tab on the bottom? It should have Desert Willow on it. And if you scroll down, Desert Willow. So, you ask, you receive.
Thank you.
I think, again, if you look at that, you're going to see very similar numbers. If it's Desert Willow or Lone Mountain, I think our one offshoot would be Desert Sun. It is a much smaller school than both of them.
Yep.
You look at the enrollment in Desert Willow, you look at the enrollment in Lone Mountain, very, very similar. I think it's within 33 students of each other. So really the question becomes, what are you questioning here is whether it's financially different. The answer is not very. It's not to the point that, again, you can see the savings, 608,000 versus 653. You can see the ADM changes. So financially, it'll paint the same picture for you. So the question becomes, what variables are you looking at then?
The variables I'm looking at is what I can't see, which is the impact to enrollment. Yes, I get your numbers, and you factored some pretty good ones. And I know we're basing it off of PV, and you and I have had conversations about how we look at 30-some-odd thousand students versus 38. But I guess my other piece there is putting them in the equation. You'd have 3 set forums. You'd have community family looking at all 3 schools, you could weigh and guesstimate impact, because we did use the word of mouth as our marketing metric. And that's a dangerous metric that's potentially going to bite us, because while we can sit here and say we're going to hope that our word of mouth is based on test scores, I don't know if that's going to get us anywhere when we start making these decisions, because there's the blowback. And there's already blowback in the sense of where we are as a district. And I mean, we do a good job at shooting ourselves in the foot, and I mean community, parents, and everybody, by going down the negative track that we're going down, because we're not doing ourselves any favor in attracting right now, because we're constricting.
Well, I think, again, Mr. Dolezal said it a few times. First, we have to essentially right size, and we have to become good where we are. And again, if you're looking at blowback and you're talking about it, I'm sure as well, if we had this, Desert Willow parents would be here as well, and they would be saying so I think the variables you're talking about are some of the other variables that don't deal with my side of the house. It would deal more on the other side of the house, moving away from the numbers. But I think that would be the discussion then. What specific variables what are you speaking of? Because right now it's very general terms. Remember more?
Yep.
So it would be nice to have, like, when you say blowback, what the specific pieces are, so we can answer.
Now you're going exactly to my point. We don't know because it's not in front of us.
Well, a couple things, and I think as the focus group did work through the scenarios, the 2 big pieces that stood out the most, there's calculated risk with either school, whatever one you're closing. 2 big variables was open enrollment and SFD coverage. If you have a house that's 100% covered, or you're going to buy a house that's 37% covered, financially you're going to have the house 100% covered. As we look at open enrollment, it was in the 70s, 80s, the open enrollment. Edgar, can you go to that map for me, please? Can you go to that map that Vicki put together? So this is looking at enrollment at Desert Willow, which is somewhere in here, I'm guessing. And you look at where all of our students come from outside the district. That red dot there, that is Deer Valley's Spanish immersion program.
Right.
So as we look at that, we currently have families that come up Cave Creek, make their way to Desert Willow. How can I calculate that? Will we lose them? Yes or no? I can't. But knowing that there is a school smack in the middle of all those families where they would go, as opposed to moving to another school, that's a calculated risk where we gain the second highest open enrollment in the district compared to Lone Mountain. That's a major factor that we looked at as the focus group and as a cabinet before we made the recommendation. Those were 2 factors that, when you look at the story of Lone Mountain versus Desert Willow, there was nothing at Desert Willow or at Lone Mountain that can make up for the potential cost and risk of Desert Willow.
But you're talking function, though.
If you can clarify, what do you mean function?
Meaning it's a function. I mean, it goes back to everything we keep saying. There's all these different functions at every school. So does the building make the difference, or does the function make the difference?
Well, function and location. I mean, when you look at a lot of the programs, and so when you look at the location of Desert Willow being right off a major highway, easy to get into, understanding Lone Mountain's not too far away, but that's a big factor of it.
And SFD is subjective too. It's like a home warranty. It's not 100% guarantee. There's some nuances to the SFD fund, is there not?
Well, there's times it may take multiple years before a project gets approved. There is no guarantee. And again, if I'm left with a choice of, I have a chance at having this 100% covered, so if a roof goes out, it costs me nothing,
right.
Or my other chance is if the roof goes out, it costs me $800,000 because it's 1.2 and I get it 37% covered.
And where in the budget do we have it?
Right, and you've seen where in the budget. Ultimately, yeah, we would love, and I think I've shared this in updates. Our goal, we would love to have 3 months of operating costs in our carry forward, where we're talking about.
Yeah, and to bring up that point, I mean, there was a scare that was going through administration today in respect to the federal budgets being frozen, and we were worried if IDEA was going to be frozen. As well as our title funds were going to be frozen. If that did occur in the situation we're in right now, we would have a difficulty providing for those students at this point because
our carry forward would be cut by the difference.
No, I understand the math part, but you still have to assess all risk. I mean, it's just good business.
Can I go back to Dan's point about the program? So if we were to close Desert Willow, let's just say, those students would then have the opportunity, they would go shopping. So if we close Lone Mountain, those kids are going to go shopping. We've got Black Mountain that offers more programming, quite frankly, than Lone Mountain that's a mile away. If we do that to Desert Willow, the closest, we don't offer that. I mean, we could move that programming, or they could go look, and it's in many of those people's backyard where they're going to go find it, where they know that they're going to be having budget problems too, but they're not talking about their budget problems openly like we are at this very moment in time. So I think if we would have put all three on the table, which, I mean, we could have, but then we're disrupting three, like this would be a third bigger of the people upset than what we currently have.
And ultimately, at this time, again, based on statute and going,
But I understand the rules.
Okay.
Yes, but I still got to ask
I
the
wasn't
question.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm crystal clear on that. There's just, if this doesn't hit right, then you're putting that one on the table anyways. And ultimately, there's been, obviously, rumors run wild here, so there's that rumor that's floating around that's next.
So just for clarification, are you saying all three is what you would want to look at, like closing all three?
I'm
right
just
now?
looking. It'd just be nice to look at all options when you're going through a cash burn and you're trying to figure out. You're not going to remedy it in one swing of the bat. I mean, if you do, you're a hero, and every financial arm in the world will want you and pay you whatever you want. The reality to it is that you attack cash burn in stages and smart, and you've got to get some good reads because again, if you make this move, there's no walking it back.
I think the focus group did look at options at the beginning, because they did talk about some of those grade level banding and other things, and then they moved past them because there wasn't consensus in the group, is my understanding. I wasn't in it, but
Right.
that's my understanding.
And ultimately, yes, I do think we're attacking it in stages. And while you're asking, why didn't we give you three options? We gave you two. If you want to include moving sixth grade up, then maybe that's three options in terms of that. So that is what we've presented. Ultimately, it will be up to you all to decide option 1, 2, 3, where that is. Again, we wanted to make it as clear as we could in terms of, especially knowns. A lot of this is unknowns and it's what ifs, and I get that. What we know, though, is the position that we're in financially right now. We know that. We know what's coming in the years ahead if we do not stop. We've got to address that. It's got to be addressed one way or the other. And again, ultimately, whether that's for, do we want to put this community through another year of okay, your school, my school, other schools, all of this stuff, I think that's something that you don't know and needs to be weighed into this whole, procedure as well, so.
You had a question?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to try to clarify. Maybe what you're trying to get at, I don't know if you wanted three options, or do we have the map showing the new boundaries? Does anybody have that up? Anybody have
I know
access to
exactly what
that?
you're talking about.
Edgar, on the district website.
For elementary schools, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got the sliver.
Yeah, there you go. Pink. Are you getting at this? And when it comes to being efficiency and having capacity percentages at each campus, it feels as though Desert Willow is not equitable in size from a student body on that campus compared to now the other two
Right.
zone
So
schools.
the original proposal part of the group was talking about exactly what you're doing. How can we make three schools that are roughly similar in size?
Correct.
Based on feedback, based on what we've heard, based on listening, we've heard the really important thing to the Lone Mountain community is the ability to stay together. So we honored that request and what we had heard in terms of, and that was the update to this, which therefore then did make. The numbers that Dr. Hendrickson had showed, that was if all of Lone Mountain would go to Black Mountain. From conversations, from talking with people, I'm very confident that there will be Lone Mountain families that actually would choose Horseshoe Trails for one reason or another. Somebody had mentioned not knowing in that. Well, we are sending out, we're scheduled to send out both a staff and a family survey in terms of intention, looking at getting that back before we go to spring break so we can really go. That's what we know right now if everybody went where we said. But also Desert Sun families have an opportunity to choose potentially to go to Black Mountain instead, or to Desert Willow for that matter. So having that priority window open for the district until March 7th, we're not really going to be able to know what this split is until after that. And that, again, is only the people that are going to return those to us, and everybody still has the right to change their mind. Someone could tell us they're not coming and then decide to come. Someone could say, yes, we're coming, and then whether they move or just choose a different school, all of that, we know. But we had never done that as a district. Other districts do it pretty regularly, but having kind of a what is your intent, just to help us forecast even better, we thought was important for this year as well. Did that answer your?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was more trying to see if number mores, did you want 3 options, or why weren't, based on capacity, just 3 schools be considered for closure together at one time?
It's a combination of a lot of things because the data points keep moving. So when you look at things, you're kind of going, hey, this microphone sucks. No, I was looking at it because, again, as we continue to move the conversation and the narrative based on feedback, it's changing the perspective of how we look at things. And so, again, we're making a very serious decision. As was mentioned, the cabinet makes the recommendation, the board closes schools. Well, if I'm going to put my vote on something, you better believe I'm going to push back as hard as I can to make sure I have all the information to make an informed decision. So that's my reasoning.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Well, first, Brian, thank you for providing such detailed information. I know that was not an easy task to pull this all together. Couple of questions, since we're talking about Desert Willow. Is the immersion program a profitable program?
Again, we've got to. I think we need to stop talking about profit when it comes to educating kids.
Well,
what we do know is that it brings in, and I apologize, I want to say 78, but we're bringing in 75 to 78 additional students to the district, so we are collecting that times 5,500 if you include both the 5,013 and the DAA money. So there's 267 Spanish immersion students. 78 of them are from outside of the district. Again, I'm not doing the math off the top, but it's
Learning from the past in respect to if you're talking about ending the program, we ended Mandarin again.
Yeah.
And went over to Deer Valley where I was at that point, and it was the initial was 74 students, which did drop by year 2 to 62 students that came over to Deer Valley from that program. So it did result in a loss. Now, the profitability, if you're saying per what we bring in for students to what we spend on that particular program, remember Desert Willow still does have an English side to it, so we would have to remove that English side and the cost for that.
in grades 3, 4,
Okay.
3 and up.
Yeah.
Once, let's say, one or both of these schools would be closed. Am I understanding correctly that there's still more cuts that the district would have to make?
With closing one school, you would still have an additional.
And even if you look at 2 schools, so again, when we're looking at the discussion with like teacher raises and so forth, that would mean we would keep a little bit extra from the capital over to M&O, or we would earmark a little bit more in carry forward that we wouldn't want to spend in order to do that again to help reward our teachers moving forward. That's another big thing, because we heard loud and clear too that we need to make sure we're taking care of our staff, and this is not, as Member Moore did say, this is not going to be like a one-shot thing.
No.
This is going to be recovering from years of decision-making that put us in this spot. But in
And
that
again,
time, we saw-
I feel I have to say something. I don't. We are where we are. I'm not blaming previous things. ESSER was a nice Band-Aid that helped get through those things, but that is now gone. Decisions are made to do the best you can for the students that you have to serve, and we are honored to serve and help grow. So yes, we are where we are, and we got to make some different decisions moving forward in terms of how to best proceed. But I'm going to not talk disparagingly about previous leaders because I know.
Yeah, I didn't mean that in a disparaging way.
I can speak to that because I was there.
Well, we are where we are, and we need to figure it
Yeah,
out.
it is
Right,
what it is.
correct.
I mean,
Thank you.
and-
Yeah.
We can point fingers all day long. I think that ship sailed.
Right.
Yeah, it's
So-
not, decisions are made, the best is made based upon the information you have. The unfortunate thing with all of this, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of guesswork, because you don't know exactly this is what enrollment's gonna be.
It's a lot of projections.
And it is, it's projections, so we have to make a decision based on our best estimate. I don't want to say guess, because that's not appropriate. But with the assumption, if you close the two schools, now having listened to all of the community comments at these forums, my takeaway, it's not necessarily the building that makes the school. It's the people and the programs that are in the school that have created the culture within the school. Desert Sun has a very unique culture, as does Lone Mountain. The kids from either of those schools would be moving to one of two other schools. So how do we guarantee families that the culture they had at their home school will carry over, that there's going to be those, it'll be embraced, it'll be a great experience for them?
I don't think we can guarantee that any culture will ever be it's not going to be the same. It's going to be a new culture, so if.
Including of the school that's receiving students even. That doesn't, when you bring in people, regardless, 2008, there was a culture at Sonoran Trails. 2009, the culture shifted. And I would argue taking two very powerful communities and blending them led to a beautiful synergy that actually improved things. I see that as the option with this same thing, is that these four very powerful communities coming together, and again, so how can we guarantee giving them the options? What is the best school for you? Go to Desert Willow, go to Black Mountain, go to Horseshoe Trails. Where is the fit for you and your child? Where do you believe that is? Because if that's what they get, then that culture is, then they felt a little bit of that culture, they felt at home with it, so that's going to enhance.
Perhaps the way I should have phrased it is, for Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails, which is where they would be the biggest receivers. Are those campuses working on some type of plans to help integrate kids, to, spread the love?
Absolutely. I know I've actually seen recent emails from all the principals to their staffs about, hey, you know what? There's people coming for a tour. This is our opportunity to show them what a fabulous place this is and welcome them and bring them in. So there's that talks. Do you want to go over some of the?
So Mr. Owsley and Mr. Pednato, I've asked them both to have multiple events between the vote and March 7th, because March 7th is when we would like priority open enrollment to happen. And so they'll have multiple events where they welcome the new folks on in the evening to tour, to get to know their campus. And then we've got some other open house events. And then we're There will also be like their typical family science night, and they would open that up to the community, so anybody who wants to come in and see what is it like here, what are these teachers like.
I would say staff as well being able to attend those events, because it's one thing to, hear the principal give a speech about something, but to kind of see the culture and the community and the families. That's one of the things that we're going to be encouraging staff to attend as well, as they make their kind of fill out their survey of where they would like to land.
So Aaron's going to do a big feature on his horsemanship, and Mr. Owsley will do a big feature on his drama and his theater and dance. And so we've got already that stuff in the works, and then we're, depending on how everything goes, we're talking about a possible moving up day in May, where the kids could go see it, their new school, but there's a lot of other things, because I also don't want to put kids on a bus and say, you're going to Horseshoe Trails and you're going to Black Mountain, goodbye, I'll never see, I don't want to do that either, so we want to see where the numbers fall before we settle that one, but we want multiple opportunities for kids to get on the campus, whether it be during the day or in the evening, so that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like they're the new kid on the block.
And I don't think you asked, but similar things are going on at Sonoran Trails. Should the rising sixth graders wind up going there, again, bringing them over, having a similar event that the rising seventh graders have gotten to. So that is in the works in terms of planning that possible transition as well.
Just a couple thoughts that I had listening to all this too. Well, we are tasked with a difficult decision, and we've got to hear all the comments, and you hope that you can do the best for everybody, knowing that people are going to get hurt. I felt some of the anger and the sadness. How do you guarantee? Well, like you said, you can't guarantee it. But what I'm hoping, and this is the old hippie in me, I am imagining the focus being shifted from not this school, and don't touch our stuff, to how do we as a community then come together to make this the best situation for the kids. I'm hoping that that'll happen. Like I said, I know there's a lot of anger right now, and not wanting to get the place that you've been sending your kid for the last few years, the upheaval, but I'm hoping that will happen to make it, because the kids will acclimate based on how the adults handle this. And if the adults are, accepting and supportive, it will make it a lot easier. And it will make it easier for the entire community, which is what this, that's what I keep hearing is community. This is our community. So hopefully that'll be the case. The other thought that I had was, Member Moore was talking about the scenarios and all that, and you can't do this in one swing. And the other things there is that, we have been tasked with closing these two schools. That's our decision. We haven't been tasked with closing 3. But I do see that, man, if they had come with us with closing 3 schools, and you said you can't walk it back, that would be really tough to walk back. We would be taking 3 out of 5 schools that we'd be closing. That would be huge, and the impact of that on our open enrollment would also be huge too. So, you can put things through all kinds of lenses. I hope that we look at what we're doing right now and how it will affect us. Will we have to come back to this someday? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Hopefully not, because the schools that are closing are good schools. The schools that are remaining are good schools. So hopefully we can turn this into a community that will be supportive and do what we need to do for each kid. So that's what I got to say right now.
Well, and just one other thing that got brought to mind in terms of that. Again, if you look long-term at the demographers' reports, the neighborhood most likely to turn over. In fact, by right now, Desert Willow is slightly below Lone Mountain. I think Dr. Plutnik went over numbers. By 2027, that's projected to flip-flop because the neighborhood that could turn over in our district is most likely Desert Willow. So, that student population in there, I think that was another factor in terms of that, and that's not been brought up or anything like that. But again, that's demographers' projections, and that's best guesses in terms of those things, and we just don't know.
One of the things I just also want to address, just from seeing some questions that we've received and comments, is that concern with Black Mountain's capacity being at 670 students. We had our FMG company come out and look at actually schematics, and yes, it could hold. Cabinet went over there 2 weeks ago and physically walked into every single classroom and counted every single classroom. More than enough capacity to house 670 students. That, again, with demographers' report, that will slightly dip over time. So we were able to make sure and, again, assure that if we have both PALS and PATH, having them in great locations, having related services, being able to be housed there and have their space to be able to service their kids, it's definitely not going to be an issue. And also knowing it was a high school of over 1,000 at one point, it can hold 670 kids without overcrowding.
Does that number include the preschool program? That 670?
So that does not at the 670, and so that's one of the things that in phase 2 that we are currently looking at is doing a centralized location for our preschool programs, and then expanding our preschool programs there.
You don't have classrooms left over.
Yeah, we did have classrooms left over even after that.
Okay, I have a kind of deviating here. There's all kinds of different information coming from SFD. It's this, it's that. Depending on who you talk to, you get multiple different answers. How old is Lone Mountain's building?
Sorry, thanks for the question. So you had Desert Willow opened in 99, Lone Mountain in 2002, and Horseshoe in 2005. They were 3 years apart, and I could be off by 1 year. Maybe it was 2003 and 2006.
Okay.
But they're 3 years.
Now,
It was 2002. So yeah, Lone Mountain
Now-
2002, Horseshoe Trails 2005.
I don't know if you've been told the same thing, but I kind of gathered from SFD, there's 2 sets of rules. The older schools have 1 set of SFD rules, and the newer ones, there's a different. I don't know if that's true or not, but.
Well, that is one of the things we're working in, and I mentioned some of the different people we're working with. So ROI Properties and then the attorneys, Gus Rosenfeld, we're going through them in terms of getting exactly all of that because, like as you said, we've made a phone call, we've inquired, heard one thing, then we made a phone call, inquired, and it wasn't quite the same, and we want definitive answers in terms of those things. But yes, I have heard that anything before 1999 kind of went into one pool, and that happens to be kind of all of our 100% covered. And then those schools that were after that, Lone Mountain, again, was built with B bonds and SFD dollars, same with Horseshoe Trails, and same with Sonoran Trails. So those are the schools that might have percentages that go along with any SFD projects.
Okay. So going back to, you said Lone Mountain was built in 2003?
No,
Two?
open two, yes.
Okay, so that building's 23 years old.
Yes.
What's the lifespan of a roof or an AC?
I'm looking at Mike, just in case Mike is here. What we do know is that part of the FMG process, and there's a chart on the Facility Focus Group webpage, is that kind of recommended replacement for things based on their lifespan. Over the next 10 years, I think Lone Mountain has about $1.2 million in projects, only covered at 37%, where Desert Willow has only $600,000 in recommended projects covered at 100%.
Okay, so if for whatever reason the roof at Lone Mountain next year or in 2 years needs repair or replacement. One, is it feasible to assume to some degree that SFD is going to would cover 37% of it?
That is a no, yes.
Okay.
Well,
so that-
again, it could be you submit repairs, and it could be that year. It could be.
But they'll cover that portion of it. Now, when is a different story.
And there's a rubric that they work off of, so
Okay.
when Mr. Santina submits, there's a rubric that prioritizes the projects, and so SFD has a formula that prioritizes who they.
So
run
then
the
we
projects
would
first.
have to come up with $800 or $1 million to cover the rest of whatever that roof would cost. And listening to Ryan, we don't just have a spare 800 mil or 800,000 just sitting around.
Correct.
Okay.
And no credit card to put it on.
Whether it's open or closed?
That's if there's kids in it. If we are housing kids in it, doesn't need to be at full capacity. If you have programming there, that's the coverage. And so, yep,
Okay.
in the buildings, yep.
Now I got a different topic.
Okay.
Your Plan B. You mentioned a SPED Academy-ish type thing, bringing the special ed PALS type.
Correct. Looking at.
kids. Or not
No.
PALS, but the special.
Correct. So
ed.
we currently serve our PATH and our PAL students here.
Yeah.
But for those students who are outplaced, whether that's been through legal action or we just don't have services, whatever that is, and again, I think Dr. Pletnick was
So-
estimating about 2.4
And
million.
that would be for a year down the road.
We would
Not
start
the-
small
not
next
the
year.
25.
August, right?
Okay,
August
you
of
talked about level
26 is what you're saying?
C and D
So
services.
to be full blown in August of 2026, but we would start small this coming year. We would like to get a para to start being trained by AZ Aspire, learning all of that systems in terms of how we deal with that. And then ultimately, can we bring back, I think as Dr. Pletnick mentioned earlier, can we bring back 2, 3, 4 students, starting small next year, so we're not sending that out. And that also gives us a time to work out all of that. Need to bring in somebody who's actually going to run that program. That program is more expensive than a traditional school, just because
Well-
of all the things that they need to do.
So what's
I-
the
not-
capital investment?
Well, you mentioned that the level C and D kids, so I assume that there's specific certifications we would have to have?
So they just need a special education certificate. Any special education teacher can do
Okay.
it. Now, we need additional training because just because you have a special education certificate doesn't mean you're trained in how to deal with some
Okay.
of the different behaviors or perhaps autism or
Sure.
very specialized disabilities. But just to be clear, we're already trying to, I'm going to say stop the bleeding, but one of the issues we're struggling with is when we're talking about stopping the 1.5 million, but now I'm supposed to be creating new programming, but I have no money to create the new programming. So I've got to stop the 1.5 million from going out so that we can have some of that sitting here so that we can staff it appropriately. And it's got to be staffed, again, while a special ed certificate is the letter of the law what we need that extra training, so then we need to staff that at a higher level salary in order to attract someone. Because in our meeting with AZ Aspire, we really just wanted to contract with them. We were like, hey, will you guys come out and help us and do it for us? And that way we don't have to bus our kids down. At least we save that money. And they said, we can't staff it for you. We're sorry. And so they told us we're kind of copying some of their model, and we're going to do our best to make that work. But we need money to stop other
Okay,
But-
you brought up actually what I was going to ask next. We're paying roughly $80,000 per kid.
per kid.
Okay,
Plus the bus,
plus the bus.
which is
So,
usually one-on-one.
and from what I've gathered, hiring special ed teachers is expensive. So would we have to revamp our pay formulas And if you're special ed, you're over in this category versus,
For this particular campus and this particular program, yes.
okay.
So that is actually in consent agenda tonight. There's a position in there for that exact thing.
And I was going to bring that up.
Behavior tech, we've
Yep.
got a teacher who's going to be more specialized than a typical special ed and have the additional training, and then an administrator to oversee the legalities of it all.
And the question is, how are we doing that this year without additional cost? Well, we are paying roughly $2,000 a month for AZ Aspire to have a para on a one-on-one transportation, where they have offered, if we hire our own person, we can put that person and then send them to AZ Aspire, and they will train them and begin that training process for next year. So not only do we cut that $2,000 cost by hiring our own person, but it's prepping them for the next year. So those are the types of things that we have to think a little bit outside the box for the cost savings. So, because again, we don't want to, right now we're not in the mode to expand positions necessarily. And that's one thing we've worked on with the reorganization of certain departments, as well as the not filling positions in certain departments, including special ed, so that we try to keep that M&O cost down this year.
You've talked about, like, Mesa using some of their empty classrooms for community things.
Well, they actually have a building dedicated to that community programming where they're bringing in, they're inviting homeschooled students and
Okay.
things like that to come in, and they use ESA dollars to pay for, they don't do any core classes whatsoever. They don't give grades, but it is a school experience for those students who are otherwise homeschooled.
So how would Cave Creek go about promoting, hey, we have an empty building, we have space available? I mean, word of mouth isn't going to quite.
Right. Well, that would be ECS, and that was one of the other things, one with them, but two, again, you got to spend money to make money at some level. So we're very curious in terms of your thoughts. Again, we came into education for one thing. Does it make sense to hire someone who their job is, because we don't have someone right now, certainly with that expertise and all of that, whose job is to fill our buildings with renters, whether it's gyms, whether it's the Fine Arts Center, whether it's this programming. Their job would be to go to the homeschooled fairs and things that and the events that they have, and put it out there that, hey, we have this option available for you. What I would foresee is somebody who's making some type of salary, but then it could be commission based in terms of what are they bringing into the district, and then they get some of that back to where their job is to really fill our fields, do all of that in terms of going out marketing, going out and investing their time and energy in order to fill those things to where we are getting additional civic fund dollars and taking ESA money from students otherwise.
And as a reminder, that wouldn't be impacting the M&O side, that would be impacting that cash side of it.
Right.
And what it would also do is allow, like our facilities department who currently does bookings and all of that, free them up for expanding their jobs and taking care of things. So that can have multiple benefits by that new position.
Would this person, and I know it's kind of gray at the moment, would this be an actual employee or a contract employee? Because contract
I would-
employee would bring, financially would be a huge benefit, because we're not paying benefits for a contract employee. But you get what you.
But we
get
have a
for
lot
it.
of contract
That's-
employees,
Yeah,
which is
higher
part of the
expense
cash
and
flow.
less control over them. That's my only concern, is I think about higher expense, less control. But,
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely something to look at.
I think I just want to reiterate this cash balance versus the horrible numbers that we see in our M&O and DAA. Again, to reiterate, even for us as volunteer board members, of what we have being tasked, we put children at the forefront of our mind, and now we're trying to figure out how to have other revenue sources. And many of us have business degrees and that sort of thing, but that we're trying to have to subsidize our spending or have some other revenue sources simply because the state does not fully fund our budgets, whether it be specifically for special education and everything else. And those numbers seem very small. They, by 28, that $1 million, $2 million adds up very fast. What are the cabinet's thoughts of an override? Because it really seems like the only option, and the state has it set up that way, right, to supplement public education with the bond
Right
and
now,
or an override.
We're not agendized to be talking about an override, so.
No, but it's a question.
It's a good question. It's a very good
It's a funding
question,
source.
but we're not really
Aren't we having a
agendized
working
to be
session?
talking about that, unfortunately. So, I'm sorry.
Well, we can bring it to another meeting. We
can.
can have another work study. We can,
Well, we definitely
do
need
all
one
that.
because we've got 5 minutes left and we haven't even, you guys have done all the talking. So is it possible on the vote date that we do the same thing? Because I think there's still more work to be done. In 5 minutes isn't
We
going to get
have
it.
6 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Please excuse me. 1 extra minute's going to
Well,
really get me there.
Yeah, hey, you know.
and remember, well, we can work together because ultimately, we don't have to wait until that day. We could do it.
I'm just
We
trying to
could
be
do it
respectful
beforehand.
to Member Walker's point of we have other obligations, unfortunately. So it's balancing our schedules to make sure that we can give this the attention that it's due.
I understand.
Yeah, I guess it didn't need to be a call to the cabinet right now, but just more understanding how the state has set us up for funding sources. And like I said, we're having to think of other revenue streams that aren't even education related.
That's why we should just form a committee and go after all variables that give us that outside scope that take the burden off the district. Because, again, they are, to their point, focused on education, and that's maybe where we can get the right people in the seat to talk about all variables to get us the additional funding outside the normal scope.
I will say, I appreciate what the administration has done in trying to keep cuts out of the classroom. Over the years, it's gotten increasingly more difficult to stay out of the classroom. Talking about closing schools is not anything I look forward to because it's not an easy thing to do, but I also believe that Cave Creek is the district that it is because of the people that are here, not because of the buildings that we have.
100%.
And regardless of where those people are, it's their passion and their commitment to our students that's what makes this district unique and what makes it a great district.
One quick question on moving PALS over to Black Mountain with Pat. We basically now give no choice. Is that correct? Like, for those students that require that, they only have one option now by putting it all on one campus. Is that? I'm just trying to, because we talk about school choice, right?
Right. And that's the same regardless of where, PALS is moved from multiple campuses. And so wherever those programs, I don't know if that's me, wherever those programs are, that is where the program is housed. So
Correct, that's what I'm
yes, no
saying.
matter where we pick.
So where it sits is where it sits.
Correct.
Okay.
Could those PALS parents all come together and say, hey, we would like to be here?
Well, I actually kind of like what you said, and I think that may be the misstep in the equation here is when you draw a diagram like this, you're telling everybody take it or leave it. But I like what you said, and we do have school choice, and I get that, but maybe it's looking at it from the optics of put a survey out and figure out the landscape of the land, how the parents and the students want to maneuver, and maybe build something a little bit more flexible into that so that we really do get it right. So maybe that does ease.
And are you talking about PALS or PATH?
Well, I'm talking about everything because kind of what I'm hearing, especially between emails, phone calls, and people reaching out, it's a mixed bag of getting a read on. Yes, you want where you're saying all of whatever school you're going here, you're going there, and the feedback is, well, no, I'm probably not. I'm going to go here. So you're doing all of this work, and that work's going to be readjusted because the bodies are going to end up somewhere else. So does it make more sense to figure out where the landing plane, where you're going to land, and then look at that? Because it does mess with transportation. It impacts a lot of different things, and I think that might even go a long way because, again, this decision, no matter which way it lands, no one's going to be happy. So how do we look at, to your point, Superintendent Dolezal, is how do we create choice? Because we are and we aren't, if you understand what I'm saying. And I can be a little bit more.
So if I'm understanding, again, for PALS, I know Ms. Gregory and I talked about absolutely meeting with those families that would be impacted in terms of, and again, gathering their feedback. If you're talking other students across both of the schools, then again, there is that time to go. There's the priority open enrollment window. We've set that timeline in order for us to have appropriate time where the numbers you saw were if everybody went to where they were assigned. However, we don't think that's going to be the case. There is school choice. And again, what fits for one family and what makes the most sense for them. They could be slated to go somewhere, but a different place might be better. If we can gather as much of that information as we can do the best job staffing it in terms of that with the due date due the 7th, and then working over that spring break to get together and actually then know where they are. So there is some of that knowns. And again, so I don't know if
You're kind of getting where I'm going, but yes, what I'm saying is for the cabinet is if in fact we're making some of these moves, will you be intentional to making adjustments to make sure that those that have been in the district, that have been loyal to the district, get taken care of in a way that makes the most sense? Meaning, you might look at rerouting buses because you're going to accommodate a large portion. Maybe went to Horseshoe instead of Black Mountain. That hasn't been really brought up, and I got to get it out there and ask the question so we can kind of come to, again, making that informed decision.
Yeah, bus routes are made yearly. So what we would do is,
and that was just one example.
Yeah, and that's something that I think transportation, depending upon what happens, would occur. I'm sitting down with Pam at Transportation and using their software and seeing who's going where. I've talked to her about potential community stops, even developing those types of things where it gives people choices to choose stops in order to go to different schools. So those are all options on the table, but that every year, those are decided no matter what. And I think
there again,
if it wasn't
specific to transportation and perhaps specific to whatever we are talking about comes in driver availability and
100%. But again, families need where I think, again, yes, we're talking about money and this financial, but there's also this other element, which I spoke of earlier, is the unknowns. And again, a lot of this information isn't coming out, and not maybe everybody's receiving the information that's coming out. That happens too. So I'm just making sure that we're doing our collective work to put as much information on the table so people really can go, okay, I get it. It's not just a one-dimensional, you're forcing me this or I have to do this. There is compromise, there is workarounds, there is a willingness, and I think that just needs to make sure that we're championing that message out to the community, out to the parents, because I would tell you the optics are very conflicting right now. And that's not a negative. It's just you guys are firefighting on the fly trying to figure this way out. There are unknowns. You're shifting on the fly because you're getting more information too from the forum. So I get all of that. So I have an immense amount of empathy for what you guys are going through. Just want to make sure we're putting all the cards on the table and communicating so everybody can hear what they need to hear to make a good decision or at least feel comfort in the disruption that's coming, however that may look.
Yeah, I think that sounds fairly doable with PALS being 11, 12 students. I mean, just for perspective, having kids in developmental preschool, I've had kids at Black Mountain, and then my developmental preschool was at the district office, and then developmental kinder moved to Desert Sun, so I became a part of that community while also still being a part of that. So I think those very small specialty programs kind of have always worked that way in the district. I do think having a one-on-one time with those families, since it's a small group, is important. But
if I'm understanding what you were asking, we do another one of these on the night that we're supposed to vote, or did you want to do one before that?
I'm open, but I just kind of was trying to keep it to not too many meetings because meetings on meetings are always fun.
Okay.
So I'm open, but I was just trying to be respectful of everybody's time.
We can talk and perhaps put something out in terms of everybody's availability and find the best date. Okay.
Well, at this point, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are adjourned, and it's 5:03.
We will reconvene at 6. Doors will open at 5:30 if I'm not mistaken. I'm kind of getting the hang of this.